Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today for our online event, Maine's Environment in the 2026 Legislature. My name is Emmy Taberge, and I'm the Outreach Director at the Natural Resources Council of Maine. NRCM is the state's leading nonpartisan, nonprofit environmental advocacy organization. We harness the power of science, the law, and the voices of people like you to protect the nature of Maine. NRCM is a membership organization, and our work is powered by member support. Our members are at the heart of everything we do, and we're grateful to have you as part of our community. If you're not a member yet, we hope you'll join today. We recognize that there's a lot going on in our country and in our state right now that is impacting members of our community, and we appreciate that you have taken the time today to join us here for this conversation about how we can advance environmental priorities at the State House this session. Working with you to protect Maine's environment makes our work much more meaningful, and we're grateful you're here today. Our team works across the state to advance progress on 4 issue areas: climate and clean energy, forests and wildlife, healthy waters, and sustainable Maine. We do this in the State House in Augusta, on the ground by listening and learning from people and groups across all 16 counties, and also by working with our congressional delegation in Washington, D.C. We want to acknowledge that the work we do in Maine is on unceded Wabanaki territory. We recognize the Wabanaki nations who have stewarded this land for time immemorial. We work alongside the Wabanaki nations, including in support of the effort to achieve state recognition of inherent tribal sovereignty and to protect the land, air, water, and wildlife. NRCM is committed to actively using our voices, our resources, and our power to do so. Before we get started, I wanted to mention just a few housekeeping items. This event will be recorded and posted on our YouTube channel if you'd like to review anything covered or share it with your friends. If you have questions throughout the presentation, please drop them in the Q&A box you'll find in your menu on the bottom of the screen. We'll try to save time at the end of the presentation for questions, but if we run out of time, we will respond to your questions via email. We'll also be monitoring the chat throughout the presentation, and we can pull some questions from there. All right, now I'd like to introduce Pete Dittersheim, NRCM Senior Director of Advocacy, to give an overview of the 2026 legislative session and why it's important for people like you to get involved. Pete?
Great. Thanks, Emmy. And thanks everybody for participating in this event. So the legislature is up and running. They're open for business. It is a buzz of activity at the State House with public hearings, work sessions, initial votes by the House and Senate. This is the second session of the 132nd legislature, which means it is going to be fast and intense, and lawmakers do seem determined to adjourn by mid-April, which is good news to us. That means there's a lot of work to be done by them, by us, by everybody else who's paying attention to the legislative process. During the next 3 months, they need to act on 380 bills carried over from last year, 100 new bills, and a supplemental budget that we expect to see next week or sometime in the next week released by the governor. So within this big flurry of legislation and activity, we are focused like a laser on 40 bills that really matter for Maine's environment, for our clean air, clean water, clean energy, climate action, land conservation, wildlife, and other issues. I say this just as a reminder that what happens at the State House really matters, which all of you know because you're paying attention to this. So thank you for joining us in this conversation. Advocacy is a contact sport, I like to say. So thank you for connecting with us, connecting with the issues, connecting with your legislators about some of the important bills that we'll be discussing today. Next slide. I just want to hold up our incredible staff. NRCM has an amazing staff that I feel so lucky to work with every day. The top row here are the 6 staffers who are registered lobbyists. We spend a lot of time at the State House, a lot of time. And that's how we make a difference. By being there in the room where it happens and connecting with lawmakers to help them understand our issues and to understand how they should vote. The bottom row is our outreach team who stay connected with NRCM supporters who live in every legislative district. And this is the collective team and capacity that we bring to the policy process each and every day when the legislature is in session. Next slide. So we've got a lot going on right now at the State House. The governor gave her State of the State address this week. Republican leaders provided their response, providing very different views of the state of the state. We're testifying, developing amendments, working with the administration, having conversations with lawmakers in the hallways, in committee rooms, outside of bathrooms, wherever we can chase them down, literally, in elevators. Here in this picture, we have Jack Shapiro of our staff in the upper right and Vanessa Berry in the lower left, testifying on bills that they will be discussing shortly. And as we all know, the context for this year's legislative session is really challenging. It's an election year with sharply divided electorate. The Democrats have only a narrow majority in the Maine House. This is Governor Mills' final year as governor. She's running for the Senate in a race that could determine control of the US Senate. So the stakes are large, and there's also the backdrop of federal actions to weaken and eliminate some of the nation's most important environmental laws and programs. There's increased immigration operations here in Maine, and so much more that is demanding our attention. And both parties are trying to seek partisan advantages through a broad range of policy disputes. So from the outside, it does look very polarized and divisive, but within the halls of the State House, I just want to assure you that there are also moments that are truly inspiring when the humanity and civility of our elected representatives shines through. And I've seen seen that multiple times already this year. Next slide. Okay, I took this image from the House Gallery earlier this week during what was a really moving tribute to a legislator, representative from Chester, Maine, Kathy Javner, who lost her battle with cancer at the age of 62. Really heartfelt messages were delivered from both sides of the aisle about a colleague who they deeply admired, even if they disagree on policy issues. This sort of coming together is not uncommon at the State House. In Maine's citizen legislature, lawmakers develop strong relationships with each other, with those who they represent in their districts. There's humor, there's shared learning, and there's a lot of effort to find common ground, including on environmental issues, as we saw with the trail bond in the last couple of years, and then on many other issues. Lawmakers are actually just like many of us, so I do encourage you to try to get to know them if you haven't already. Next slide. And here's one more slide that I want to share from this week, another inspiring moment, in this case of the Maine Make Polluters Pay event that NRCM helped organize with other partners in support of a climate superfund bill that Jack Shapiro is going to be telling us a little bit more about in a moment. We live in a state where public engagement, as shown in this picture, can have a big impact. We've seen it over and over again, and I'm confident that it will help us deliver progress on many bills once again this year. In fact, it already has. Earlier this month, a bill became law that we worked on a lot last year to strengthen the Land Use Planning Commission through the addition for the first time of a tribal representative who will be appointed through a joint recommendation of the tribes in Maine. The bill has a number of other important provisions. Luke Frankel of our staff, who's on the image on the screen, and I worked with Representative Bill Briggio of Augusta, Representative Jim Dill of Old Town, the Wabanaki Alliance, and many others to help get this bill through. And with that, I'd like to just hand it over to Luke, my colleague who is serving as our Woods, Waters, and Wildlife Program Director. Take it away, Luke.
Great. Thanks, Pete. And thank you all for coming. As Pete mentioned, I'm the Woods, Waters, and Wildlife Director here at NRCM. And I'm very excited to share with you today two of our funding priorities that we have within the forest and wildlife and healthy waters side of things. So the first is the Land for Maine's Future program, also known as LMF, which is Maine's most popular and effective land conservation program. LMF was created in 1987, and since then, the program has helped conserve more than 650,000 acres of land across Maine. And to just provide some context to that number, that equates to a little more than 3 times the size of Baxter State Park. So it's quite a significant amount of land that this program has helped conserve to date. And the reason why this program has been so successful through the years is that it really benefits all Mainers, regardless of where they live or how they choose to spend their free time outside. LMF properties span all 16 counties in the state of Maine, and they support the full range of outdoor recreation activities, including hunting, fishing, hiking, snowmobiling, ATV riding, and cross-country skiing. So if you can think or have done an outdoor activity outside, there's a chance that there's an LMF property where you can do that and enjoy your time outside. LMF also is really popular, especially among lawmakers, because it supports Maine's heritage industries of farming, fishing, forestry, and outdoor recreation. The program is set up so it allocates specific funds for projects that directly benefit these sectors by preserving working waterfronts, working forests, and farmland specifically. And so the program is really an economic engine for the state of Maine, and so that's why it has garnered a lot of support through the years as well. And LMF as a program was last funded in 2022. And because of that, the funding has since run out. It's basically all been allocated to either paid out to projects or is already committed to projects. So there is a very urgent need to fund this program this session. And so, in order to do that, we're currently tracking three bills for LMF aimed at funding the program, and they are listed on the screen here. And the first is LD 362, which calls for a $50 million bond appropriation to fund the program. The next is LD 593, which calls for an ongoing $10 million per year general fund appropriation to fund the program. And finally, there's LD 1312, which would redirect interest from the rainy day fund when it is full to the Land for Maine's Future program. And this interest, it varies obviously depending on interest rates and things like that, but it currently amounts to roughly $10 million per year. And so we're going to be closely tracking all three of these bills, and we'll be supporting any effort that would bring in meaningful funding to the program. Next slide. Another funding initiative that NRCM is tracking this session is LD 2141, which is a bill to provide funding for lake and farmland conservation in Maine. As many of you know, lakes and farms are critical to our economies throughout the state, but these areas currently face quite significant challenges. Our lakes face increasing pressures from development and also from frequent algal blooms that are further fueled by climate change. Additionally, on the farmland side, we are losing farmland at a rapid rate across the state of Maine, with over 82,000 acres falling out of agricultural production between 2017 and 2022. And so, in order to address these challenges, this bill would establish an ongoing funding stream of $2 million per year for both lake restoration and farmland protection by diverting funds from unclaimed bottle deposits. And so, everyone on the call here is probably familiar with Maine's 5-cent deposit for bottles, but you probably haven't thought about what happens to those deposits when the bottle is not redeemed, and you recycle it traditionally, hopefully, or in bad cases throw it out in the trash. And so currently, the vast majority of that money from these unclaimed deposits actually goes back to the beverage companies, and this is on the magnitude of about 10 to 17 million dollars per year. So it's quite a significant amount of money. And so what this bill does is it simply directs a modest portion of that money to these initiatives, farmland conservation and lake restoration, that serve a greater public good. And so with that, I'll turn it over to NRCM's Climate and Clean Energy Director, Jack Shapiro, to talk a little bit about some of our priorities in the climate space.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Luke, and thanks everyone for joining the call today. As Pete said, we have some really important priorities on the climate front this year, and I'm going to talk about two of them: the Climate Superfund bill and the bill to extend the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, or RGGI, program. So, starting with Climate Superfund, this is a really important bill to hold the world's biggest fossil fuel polluters accountable for the climate damages that they have created in Maine. A couple of other states have passed bills like this, Vermont and New York. There are several others who are taking steps towards this as well. But basically the way that this works is the we're already paying for the damages that climate change is doing to Maine. We saw them really, really starkly in the big winter storms from a couple of years ago. We've also seen droughts, other flooding events, a whole number of mechanisms by which our warming climate is affecting our environment and our communities. So the Climate Superfund is sort of built on the concept from the original Toxic Superfund federal law. And what it does is calculates the damages from climate change in Maine, identifies which of the world's largest polluters, these are the giant oil companies, coal companies, refiners that are responsible for more than 1 billion tons each of carbon pollution equivalents. And it assesses fees on those companies to help fund recovery from disasters and resilient infrastructure in Maine. Um, you know, this program, will have some startup costs. The DEP estimates about $4 million all in for the studies and research and staff time. But in just the past few years, Maine has already appropriated in our budgets more than $100 million for storm recovery and resilience investments. Pete mentioned the Polluters Pay Day of Action, showed the picture, and one of the speakers at our press conference, a city councilor from Bath, said, we're already paying for these damages, paying with flooded downtowns, paying with washed out working waterfronts, paying to elevate submerged roads, upgrading culverts. These are costs that are already being borne by Maine people, by the taxpayers, by our community budgets, our state budgets. And it's really important that the people who are actually responsible, and in many cases knew that the damages that would come from continuing to sell their products, help us pay for it. So all told, depending on how the damages and responsible parties are calculated, this climate superfund could bring in hundreds of millions to billions of dollars to Maine to help make these investments. Just for a sense of scale, in New York, which obviously is a much, much bigger state, their climate superfund is calculated at $75 billion. So Maine's won't be nearly that big, but it's still a really, really significant amount of funding that could help us pay for some of the damages that have already occurred and the investments that we need. Next slide, please. So the next bill is the LD 2037, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative bill, or the RGGI bill. RGGI is one of Maine's most successful energy efficiency and climate programs. It's been in place for about 2 decades, and NRCM was really central in establishing the program and putting it into statute a couple of decades ago. It's a multi-state cap and trade program by which large polluting power plants across about 10 states pay a fee for every ton of pollution they create. And then that funding stream comes back to the participating states, including Maine. And in Maine, it's has brought enormous benefits, largely in the form of energy efficiency investments through Efficiency Maine. So since the program started, our state's received a total of more than $246 million in energy efficiency funding, which saves money for Maine households and businesses. It avoids energy costs and energy infrastructure investments, and it reduces emissions all at the same time. So this bill would adopt sort of the latest iteration of the program that all the 10 states have agreed on, and will continue to incentivize these pollution reductions and make efficiency investments. I think really important is that because we're in a regional electricity market, as folks who've been on webinars with me over the past several years have probably heard me talk about at length, if we didn't pass this bill, it would have no effect on energy costs whatsoever, because that would all be taken into account at the regional level. But it would cut off this major source of funding for Efficiency Maine to help people save costs on energy at home and reduce those other costs and emissions. So we want to continue to benefit Maine's economy, invest in energy efficiency, keep reducing our dependence on out-of-state fossil fuels, and this is one of the most cost-effective ways to do so. So that wraps up the my piece of this. And so I will pass it on to my colleague Rebecca Schultz, who's going to talk a little bit about plug-in solar.
Hi, thanks. My name is Rebecca Schultz. I'm a senior advocate on the climate and clean energy team. So one of the bills that we're supporting this session pertains to plug-in solar, which is also called balcony solar. This is essentially a household appliance that allows consumers to plug in a solar panel to a standard wall outlet to generate their own power and reduce the amount of electricity that they have to buy from the grid. A kit might consist of up to 4 to 6 panels, depending on the size, an inverter, and a plug. And you have the option of buying a battery with a kit like this. This technology has really taken off in Europe in recent years, most notably in Germany, where there are as many as 4 million of these balcony solar kits in use today with a combined capacity of as much as a gigawatt of power. So they're little, but together they can be mighty. And part of the reason for this huge success is just the appeal that these systems have. They are very, very simple. These are small, portable units. They can be self-installed on a balcony railing or in a backyard. They're designed to only offset a portion of the consumer's electricity load, so they don't require really complicated agreements with the utilities. They don't have to go through net energy billing, and they're just nothing in comparison to the larger sort of rooftop installations in terms of complexity. And they're very affordable. They're a lot cheaper than rooftop solar on a per watt basis. So that lowers the bar just for renters and apartment dwellers, but also for people who can't afford those high upfront costs associated with installing a larger solar arrays on your roof. In Germany, a basic 800-watt kit from IKEA costs around $500. So these are very affordable. In the United States, where these are still not widely available, costs are higher. They're about $1,000 to $1,500 for a comparable kit, but the prices are coming down really, really rapidly. Importantly, these kits offer people ways to save money right now. For the average household in Maine, a 1,200-watt system, which is the maximum size that's permitted under the current draft legislation, that could cut electricity bills as much as 20%, which would amount to something like $400 a year for the average household in Maine. So that's not insignificant at all. And payback, depending on how quickly prices fall, is going to be very, very quick, a year or two. And then finally, in terms of benefits, these kits also offer resilience. As I mentioned, they can be paired with a battery to provide a backup source of power during outages. Legislation in Maine is required because under current law, these small appliances are subject to the same onerous interconnection rules as a rooftop installation that might be 20 times the size. So, in light of the current affordability crisis, with the loss of the federal tax credits, these plug-in solutions are just attracting a lot of attention across the United States right now. Utah passed the first law enabling plug-in solar here in the United States in 2025 last year, and there are now more than 20 states that are in different stages of preparing legislation this year to enable plug-in solar here. Importantly, if just a few of these states were to adopt supportive legislation, demand is projected to take off. And with that demand, costs are projected to come down very, very rapidly to EU levels as manufacturers and retailers like Home Depot and Lowe's and Costco and Amazon all respond to that demand. So we see the passage of LD 1730 as being really crucial to making sure that people in Maine are not left on the sidelines of this new application of a technology that's been around for a while, so that they're empowered to find ways to reduce their bills and make their own energy decisions. And there may be more questions about this. I know it's been in the press a lot, but I'll wait for the Q&A and in the meantime, pass it off to Vanessa, who's going to talk about some of the sustainability initiatives.
Yes, thank you, Rebecca. And hello, everybody. I'm Vanessa Berry, and I'm NRCM's resident trash talker and the Sustainable Maine Program Manager. And I focus on Maine's solid waste and recycling initiatives at both the local level and at the State House. Maine's trash and recycling management impacts all of us every day. Together, Maine communities generate over 850,000 tons of household trash every year. So by reducing the waste that we make, reusing materials, recycling, and composting what we can drastically reduce the amount of waste that we send away to landfills. So today I'm excited to talk about two bills that we'll be focusing on this session that help keep useful materials out of the waste stream. The first, LD 1908, would allow individuals and independent repair professionals to have access to tools, parts, and instructions that they need in order to fix electronics here in Maine. Currently, by design, many manufacturers create products that limit who's allowed to repair them and what types of repairs are even able to be done, which often results in devices getting discarded and replaced, even when there are only very minor issues. I'm sure many of you have experienced the frustration of trying to get something fixed and either not being able to find a skilled technician to be able to do that, or the cost of obtaining the instructions and the parts and all of the things is actually cost prohibitive, and replacing it is the more economical option. So this would address that, and allow people to repair their own tech, which also helps people learn how their devices work and keeps products in use for longer, which also helps conserve natural resources, reduce the electronic waste that we're generating, and save people money, which is great. We testified on this bill earlier in the month, and the Housing and Economic Development Committee will be holding a work session today to discuss the details of the bill. That's happening later this afternoon. So we'll be hopping over to the State House to engage in those conversations later today. We hope the discussion will result in a vote of ought to pass, and then we'll continue to advocate for right to repair in the Senate and the House leading up to their floor votes. Next slide. The second bill is still in the early stages of development and doesn't have an official LD number or a bill title yet, but it would expand Maine's product stewardship program for rechargeable and single-use batteries. Maine Department of Environmental Protection releases an annual product stewardship report every year that provides updates on all of Maine's existing product stewardship laws. And the second section of that report also identifies materials that would be strong candidates for new laws. This year, the department included a draft bill proposal in their report that would expand our existing battery product stewardship to include more modern battery technologies for rechargeables, and also include non-rechargeable or primary batteries. So those would be like the single-use batteries you might find in your small appliances, or your remote controls on for your TV, etc. And it would require that battery manufacturers help fund a program to collect and recycle those at the end of life. This is a really big deal because not only do batteries contain many valuable and finite natural resources that we want to see go back into remanufacturing, but also improper disposal of batteries can be dangerous for waste operators. We've heard firsthand from a lot of our friends at waste facilities around the state about the dangers of battery fires, both to the facilities themselves, but also to the people that work there. And it clearly demonstrates the need for more safe, responsible collection and recycling of all types of batteries. So including more batteries in Maine's product stewardship law will allow for more safe and responsible collection of those. The department is currently receiving public comments on their annual product stewardship report until February 12th. And NRCM will be submitting comments related to this proposal, and after which they present this report to the Environment and Natural Resources Committee, and we suspect that the committee will report out a bill to establish an expanded battery product stewardship program that reflects the language that's been proposed by the department. So we'll be following that process through every step of the way, and we'll keep folks updated as things unfold. And with that, I'd like to take this time to turn it over to our Woods, Waters, and Wildlife Program Director, Luke Frankel, to talk about tribal sovereignty. So take it away, Luke.
Great. Thanks, Vanessa. As Emmy touched on earlier, NRCM has supported tribal sovereignty as a legislative priority over the past several years, working closely with the Wabanaki Alliance, whose logo is shown here, and other environmental NGOs. And we are committed to supporting it again this current legislative session. For millennia, the four Wabanaki nations in Maine have been careful stewards of the land that we now call Maine. The forests, waterways, and wildlife found across our state are central to Wabanaki culture and sustenance practices, and yet without the legally protected authority and right to self-determination, the four Wabanaki nations in Maine have limited regulatory authority to control these resources. LD 785, which is a bill to implement the remaining recommendations of the Task Force on Changes to the Maine Indian Claims Settlement Implementing Act, would restore full self-determination for the four federally recognized tribes in Maine, providing them with the autonomy to sustainably manage their natural resources as they have for millennia. We'll also be supporting LD 395 this session, which is a bill focused specifically on restoring access to federal funding and programs that are available to the 570 tribes in other states, but not the four tribes in Maine. Unfortunately, the terms of the Settlement Act have prevented the Wabanaki nations in Maine from accessing the more than 150 federal laws beneficial to Indian nations that have passed since 1980, and this bill would address this by restoring access to these laws. The time is long overdue to address injustice towards Wabanaki nations by recognizing their inherent sovereignty, and we look forward to assisting the Wabanaki Alliance in that effort this sessions. And next, I'll turn it over to NRCM's Grassroots Outreach Manager, Branya Lechman, to talk about ways you can get involved.
All right, thanks, Luke. Hi, everyone. So in my role, as Luke mentioned, I'm the Grassroots Outreach Manager, and in my role, I travel around the state to listen and learn from Mainers on the ground and work with folks on protecting Maine's environment. We really cannot do any of this work without people like you, and we rely on your support to be the most effective environmental advocate in the State House. So before we get to questions, I want to share 3 ways that you can stay engaged with us this legislative session to help make a difference. So the first, maybe the next slide, is to join us at an upcoming action-oriented event. So we have events going on at the State House virtually and regionally across the state. So at the State House, we have the Waste Day of Action on Thursday, February 12th, and the Land for Maine's Future Day of Action on Thursday, March 12th. If you can't make it to those events at the State House or want more opportunity for training on these topics, well, we're going to have virtual opportunities as well in advance of each State House Action Day. The next one is actually coming up next week on Tuesday, February 3rd with Vanessa and I, the Waste Virtual Action Hour. I see a few of you on this webinar who I know are already registered, so excited to see you then. And then we also have a few regional events in Ellsworth and Kingfield where we're going to focus on advocacy skill building with a special emphasis on Land for Maine's future. You can also join our monthly climate action calls, which are hosted the first Thursday of every month. And there's always an action-oriented opportunity associated with those. So you can find the registration information for all of those events on NRCM's events page, which should be in the link that's in the chat. Okay, so there's also more events too, besides what's listed on this slide. So the second way that you can get involved in this legislative session is to sign up for our action alerts on our website. And we'll send emails with opportunities to attend public hearings, submit testimony, call and email your legislators, or sign petitions on active bills. All of those actions are so important. And if you already get our action alerts, this is not just your regular action alert sign up because you can let us know what types of actions and engagement opportunities you're interested in taking or participating in. So that should be in the chat as well. You can also use our website as a resource. There's a bill tracking page that shows the status of priority bills that we're tracking. So you can be up to date on that. All right, and then the final way to get involved is by becoming a member and donating today. Thank you to all of you who are already members. And NRCM is a membership organization and relies on donations from people like you of any amount to make the work that we do possible. So you can visit nrcm.org/donate today to become a member. So now I'm going to hand it back to Emmy.
Thanks, Branya. Thanks everyone for sharing those updates on our priority bills. There's lots of exciting work ahead of us. I'll now introduce Josh Caldwell, our Climate and Clean Energy Policy Advocate and Outreach Manager, who will moderate questions and help close us out. And as a reminder, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat or in the Q&A box.
Whew. Thanks, Emmy. That was a lot of information. I'm sure folks have questions. We already have some really good questions in the Q&A that we'll get to answering shortly. But as Emmy said, please do continue to ask questions. If we don't get to any of those questions, we will follow up with answers in an email after this. And remember that this is recorded, so you can go back and take a peek. Okay, first question I think is actually best for our grassroots outreach manager, Branya. Reed wanted to know, if you are not currently in Maine, but you do want to support the good work of the Natural Resources Council of Maine, how can you contribute today?
Yeah, so as I had mentioned before, becoming a member is so helpful, and getting others in your community to become a member is really critical for our work. I would also say that if you have friends or people that you know in Maine, sending the resources from this event would be very helpful to make sure that they are contacting their legislators. So if you're able to stay up to date and send the information to people that you know in Maine, that's huge.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Branya. We next have a question. We actually have a couple questions from Nancy and from Rick about the RGGI program that Jack described. So Jack, a two-parter here. Is RGGI expiring, or will LD 2037 expand it? And then from Rick, one of the benefits of RGGI is listed as reducing energy costs. That is promised all the time, and energy costs go up and up and up. So how do we see those reductions, and when are we going to see those reductions?
Oh, really good questions. All right, I'll take the first one first. So the RGGI program is a collaboration between about 10 different states. There have been some states that have sort of come in and out of the program. New Jersey, when Chris Christie was governor, sort of came out, and then they've come back in. Virginia came into the program, and then they came out potentially illegally, but the new governor is bringing them back in. Pennsylvania spent a long time sort of fighting legal battles trying to get in, and their governor, Josh Shapiro, no relation, just decided to pull them out of the program recently. But the states that are participating periodically review the program, because its sort of fundamental mechanism is these emissions allowances. So every polluting power plant, these are basically fossil fuel power plants over 25 megawatts. So it doesn't sort of concern itself with the smallest pieces, but really these bigger fossil fuel power plants. They have to sort of buy a permit for every ton of carbon pollution they create. And over time, that the amount of allowances decreases, so that the incentive for emissions reductions to occur, and the funding that comes back changes over time. But every now and then, that trajectory of emissions needs to be adjusted to make sure that there isn't like a big shortage, and those the costs of those allowances go way up, and it has big price impacts for people, or that they go way down, and they don't really have any impact on the behavior of the power plants. So this adopts the third program review, which is sort of the updated trajectory of those emissions, and it allocates emissions to Maine to offer for auction, so that we can sell our portion that's allocated by the states altogether, and then we can get that revenue back. So that's why if we don't pass this bill, it doesn't like expand the program necessarily, but it extends it so that we can continue to participate, and we continue to have those allowances to auction to then get the money back to invest in efficiency. So I hope that makes sense. Without our passage of LD 2037, the program would still continue in other states, and like Massachusetts, Connecticut, other New England states are participants. So we would still see the same energy cost impacts across the region, but we wouldn't get any of the benefits. So really, it's a really clear, it's a real no-brainer, this bill, honestly, when you really look at it. But we do need to our experience in the legislature is that we got to keep our eye on those no-brainers and make sure they happen. Rick, to your question, this is a really, really good question, and it's super frustrating because basically what we're doing is avoiding even bigger price increases. The costs of energy, especially electricity, are driven largely by fuel costs from fossil fuels. That's the biggest proportion of our energy costs. And every time we invest in efficiency, we lower the amount that we're spending on those fuels, but we also lower the amount of energy that's needed in the regional market, which means that the cost of everything sort of incrementally either goes down or goes up at a slower rate. It also affects the amount of energy infrastructure that's needed. So the transmission lines and the substations and the transformers and lines down your street, all of those things, when energy use grows, can start to have to be upgraded, and that really adds up over time. A transformer maybe only is, a few tens of thousands of dollars. Substation maybe is 1 million or two. A transmission line could be tens of millions or hundreds of millions. And so we're avoiding those costs through these efficiency investments. But it is I certainly recognize your frustration of the fact that we do still have this upward pressure on rates. What we're experiencing right now in this cold weather is a great example, though, of when we have these periods of high demand. That's really what drives those high energy costs across the whole year, because some power plants are switching to expensive oil. Some of the natural gas is being diverted to people's homes to keep them warm, especially in other parts of the region, and it's driving the costs up for electricity. So everything that we can invest in efficiency really does pay off. It pays off when you do the numbers at about $4 back for every dollar that we put into energy efficiency. So that's why we think this program is so important.
Thanks, Jack. Really appreciate that. And a good reminder, there is no such thing as a no-brainer in the State House. There are a lot of brains in that building, and they all have different opinions. So we have to work hard to pass anything we want to see pass. A lot of questions piling in. We're going to stick with the climate and clean energy focus. This time, a couple questions for Rebecca about balcony solar, plug-in solar. The first is if there have been any studies on savings for plug-in solar, especially in a state like Maine. And then the second part of this question is, why doesn't Efficiency Maine include solar, like plug-in solar, for rebates? So we'd love to hear your take on both of those, Rebecca.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Good questions. I have heard of one such study looking at actual savings from these, but my understanding is that it's not out yet. It's not final yet. And we would expect that output from these panels would depend a lot on how they are installed. For instance, if you have really good solar influx on your balcony, or if there's a lot of tree coverage, that would affect how much solar you're generating, especially in the summer with the leaves out. Our estimate that a setup that is 1,200 watts, which again is the sort of max capacity as the current legislation 1730 lays out right now, would allow. Our estimate that could offset roughly 20%, as much as 20% of the average household electricity demand, is based on a calculation made for our latitude in Augusta. So that does reflect sort of general Maine solar influx capacity there. With respect to Efficiency Maine Trust, there has been some discussion of that, but I think we certainly need to first move this legislation forward to allow these kinds of applications in Maine before we consider the potential for Efficiency Maine Trust to offer some additional rebates. Right now, these are cost effective even without any kind of subsidies at all. So I hope that helps answer those questions.
Oh, it does indeed. Thank you so much, Rebecca. We're going to transition gears now back to you, Vanessa, for a sustainability question. Our members are paying attention. From Linda, does LD 1908 have the same wording as the previous one that Governor Mills vetoed?
Great question. And yeah, there has been a little bit of confusion because there are two right to repair issues being tackled kind of at the same time. So the one that we are talking about today is really focused on electronic devices. So, your computers, your smart enabled devices, that sort of thing. The other bill that has been coming up in the headlines is really talking about the automotive right to repair. That was a referendum question last year. So that passed at the ballot. And then there were some revisions that were made in the legislature last session to tweak that. And that was what got vetoed. So it's a separate issue, but right to repair is something that we are trying to stay apprised of on all ends, because we think that when people have access to repair, skilled technicians and the equipment and the tools that they need to fix their own stuff, we can really extend the lifetime of the items that we have and save Mainers some money as well as natural resources. So they're separate issues, but happy to talk about any right to repair anytime. Please don't hesitate to reach out. Love talking trash.
Awesome. I can attest to that. Thank you so much, Vanessa, for that response. Okay, for Pete, this is a question coming in for you. We've talked a lot today about our legislative priorities and things we need to support. What about things that we need to oppose this legislative session?
Well, the good news is that that most of the bad bills were defeated last year. So there was a pretty big crop of what we call bad bills, just categorically. And they would have rolled back our EPR for packaging law. They would have weakened or actually eliminated our Maine ban on single-use plastic bans. It would have weakened our mining law, would have blocked development of an offshore wind port, would have repealed our clean energy goals. And there was a few others. So all of those were defeated. There aren't that many bad bills that have been carried into this session. We didn't win on all of them last year. There was one that the natural gas industry and the fossil fuel industry collectively did get through that we are lobbied quite a bit against, and we're troubled. It would block municipalities from making a decision of their to limit the construction of natural gas and fossil fuel infrastructure. We believe that towns should have that ability, so it supersedes local control. That bill we had defeated previously, but we didn't this past year. But there are always rollback bills at the State House. And I'll let my colleagues jump in if there's any that they are particularly worried about this session. But generally, we did a pretty good job. And our first principle at the State House is to not go backwards. So we concentrate a lot of attention on informing lawmakers that they need to continue to move forward, but also absolutely don't move backwards. And I'll just share that NRCM and our staff, this is one of our biggest areas of accomplishment over the last 15 years. We've killed hundreds of bad bills, literally hundreds. We defeated 100 of them just in the period that Governor LePage was governor. Anybody want to jump in with any bill that they're worried about that they're paying attention to?
I'll just add, Pete, I don't have anything specific to add to that, other than that bills can change at any time in committee. So any bill that is on any of the topics of interest, while it looks like we have a pretty good cohort up here on the panel, we're actually outnumbered at the State House by industry lobbyists and lobbyists from other interest groups. And they are working hard every day to try to put things into bills that would be bad for Maine's environment, for the climate, for the policies that we've fought really hard to put in place. So we're constantly vigilant about and have built a lot of relationships with other allies and with legislators to make sure that we hear right away when changes like that are being contemplated. But like Josh said, we have to sort of be watching throughout the process, not just in what bills get introduced, but their path through committee, even all the way on the floor until the final gavel comes down on these bills, to make sure that they're either doing something good or not doing something bad.
Yeah. Great reminder for constant vigilance and to fight to the finish. That's certainly also tenets that we hold at NRCM. So it's amazing how quickly an hour goes by when you're having fun. We're getting close to the end here, but we do have a couple of questions for Luke. And thank you to question askers. You have asked questions of every single one of our panelists. So thank you for being a well-rounded audience today. Luke, I do have a couple questions for you. I'm going to ask them in chunks because I think they are distinct enough that we'd like to hear about each of them. So first, from Barbara, is NRCM also supporting LD 798 to establish a bond fund for investing in companies to produce mass timber products in Maine?
Yeah, great question, Barbara. So this bill, it had a hearing last year, but yeah, is carried over to this year. Generally, we didn't testify on the bill, but it's clear that the forest products industry in Maine is really struggling, and being the most forested state in the country, it's really important in Maine that we keep working forest because it has a lot of wildlife benefits, and we wouldn't want that land to be converted to other land uses. So it's important that we as a state think about, various ways that we can create new innovative products for wood products as, markets are shifting. So I think we definitely support the concept. The question is, we have a lot the bill calls for a $50 million bond. So in the context of, I mentioned that Lands for Maine's Future is a high funding priority. So I think there's obviously only a finite amount of money for various resources. And so Land for Maine's Future is really our high priority in terms of state initiatives and programs that we'd like to see funded. But I think definitely it's a great concept, and that we would support it if our other high priority issues are also kind of funded as well.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Luke. And the second part here is it's really great to see NRCM's expansive legislative involvement on so many issues, but Weston is curious as to NRCM's position in supporting the state of Maine DEP's stated focus to eliminate domestic overboard discharges from septic fields on coastal properties. So a specific question here.
Yeah, great question, Weston. Thanks for asking. So last year, the department actually submitted a bill, LD 401, that listed a whole bunch of changes that they were making to their overboard discharge program in order to, move the state further along in removing them. They've made a ton of progress through the years. In the 1970s, that department estimates that there was about 3,000 overboard discharges, and now currently we have only about 700. So they've been really successful. The program has been in eliminating the vast majority of overboard discharges, which are high risk to shellfish resources and water quality in our coastal waters. And so that bill, the department put it forward. It made a lot of changes that they felt will help them, get close to eliminating the remaining 700. And we'll continue to keep tracking and that effort, and can provide support to the department as needed as they hope to accomplish that goal. Additionally, we did help pass legislation last session, LD 1550, which didn't deal with overboard discharges, but dealt with adjacently septic systems. And there's this problem called short circuiting, where septic systems, the current design standards allow for the effluent coming from septic systems to pass pretty easily to surface waters without treatment in certain conditions. And one of those conditions is that is commonly found that where this issue happens is along the coast where we have shallow to bedrock soils. And so this bill essentially directs the Department of Health and Human Services to update the septic system design standards to make it so that they have to design the leach field in a manner that eliminates this issue. So that rulemaking will be forthcoming following the passage of that bill last session, and that will address septic systems that have similar issues, pollution issues to overboard discharges in coastal waters.
Awesome. I'm going to keep you on the hot seat, Luke, for one last question before we wrap things up. And I just want to mention too, Luke came in 2 years ago and immediately identified that septic was something that needed to be reformed in the state, and has done a ton of work on that front. So you're clearly asking the right guy. The last question that we have for you is, we talked about Land for Maine's Future earlier in the webinar. Is LMF funding included in the governor's budget, the supplemental budget this year?
Yeah, that's a great question. The answer is we don't know for sure. That should be coming out in the next couple of weeks, but we haven't heard definitely whether it will be in the budget or not. Like I said, we're supportive of any funding stream. So if it's in the budget and that's able to get passed, and it's a sufficient amount to support the program, we'd be in support of that. but to be determined, we should find out in the next week or so.
Okay. Well, thank you so much all for answering those questions. I'm going to hand it back over to Emmy to close us out. Really appreciate you all for being here.
All right. Thanks, Josh. And thank you all for joining us today. Definitely want to send a special thank you out to all of our members who are on the call. NRCM is a membership organization, and our work is powered by member support from people like you. So thank you so much for being a part of our community. If you're not a member yet, we hope you'll join us today. And if you didn't get your question answered, although I think we did a pretty good job, we will follow up with you via email. You're also always welcome to email us. And you can also check out our most recent blog post, which covers a lot of the bills that we discussed today. We'll follow up with you via email with resources, the recording, and the slides from today's program in a few days. So thanks again so much for joining us, and hope you have a good rest of your day.